Before further ado, let me start with a couple of housekeeping. This webinar is public and it's also recorded. In parallel, we are streaming live to YouTube. So hello to all the YouTube viewers who are following this webinar on the live stream there. This is being recorded. We will use the YouTube recording to basically populate the YouTube channel, the AI4Belgium YouTube channel. So this recording will be available later on, and including the presentation will be made also public. We wanted this session to be extremely interactive. So as an audience, you will have the opportunity to respond to the polls. And obviously we have along the way a couple of questions for you, so please participate. We will also have a Q&A. You will see that in a minute in the agenda. So prepare your questions already. Be interactive into the chat box if you want. For the YouTube viewers, your comments will be also watched, so you certainly can put your commentary on the YouTube commentary box there. And without further ado, let me jump into the content that we've come and put together. We will kick it off by a high-level view on AI4Belgium, where we stand and what is the nature of the collective. I'll have a couple of words on the Infrastructure Working Group in particular. We also wanted to have a highlight on something coming up on us very fast, a bit of a perspective to the future on quantum computing. And then I will be joined by a couple of panelists, and those distinguished speakers will give us a lightning point of view, if you want, on infrastructure, and give us some insights and some news of what's happening in their world. We will have, as I mentioned, some Q&A and interactive session. Again, please be interactive on the chat. Please ask your questions. We have a moderator working with us here to make sure that we have all of those figured out in the right way. And then we will close up, we believe, in probably 80 minutes from now, no more than an hour and a half from now, and also highlighting some of the next steps. Before I jump into the presentation part, I want to thank everyone who has made this event possible. Certainly the whole team of the BOSA, certainly all the panelists who spent some time in preparing and in thinking with me. Definitely my partner in crime, Michael, who jumped with me on this and will facilitate this whole session with me in a minute. And obviously all the people I've talked to in the past 6 months to prepare this working group. There's quite a lot of people that give us some advice, some perspective, some insights, and you will see this captured in the coming presentations here. So without further ado, Nathaniel. Nathaniel leads the AI4Belgium. He's a distinguished member of SPF BOSA. And Nathaniel, the floor is yours for an update on AI.
Thank you, Dominic. I will be short, and thank you everyone for being part of this launch. So just a kind reminder, so AI4Belgium is a grassroots community bringing together key players from academia, private sector, public sector, and civil society. And the idea is not to push technology, but accompany the change that are currently happening. In the way the people and organization can benefit from them, with a specific focus on ethics and responsibility of the transition. AI4Belgium has the ambition to position Belgium, including its region, in the European and global AI landscape. So AI4Belgium is really supporting the regional, very ambitious regional plan from Flanders, Brussels, or Wallonia. Up to now, there are 320 organization in AI4Belgium, all universities, the big players from Belgium, the startups, but also public services or federation from the civil society. Also big international companies are participating to it. And we bring together more than 1,700 experts. In the last 12 months, more than 30,000 people have attended the different sessions we organized. Next slide. The strategy was approved by the former government, and there are 6 axes. So an effort on the skills. I will not develop it today. A responsible data strategy, the uptake by the private sector and the public sector of the AI technologies, supporting the excellence in research, and the 6 axes really about ethical and legal framework. Next slide. Yeah. So there are many activities within AI4Belgium. This slide present the main big projects. So some of the projects are, for example, giving accessible the course for every citizen about AI, developed by Helsinki University with the support of KU Leuven and UC Louvain. We are also the contact point with the AI4EU platform, but we act as the AI watch for Belgium. So if you have any question around AI, we bring together all the data from the region, and we can give you a good view on what's happening in Belgium. For example, we developed the AI landscape of all startups, scale-ups that is available on the website. We also act as a consultation platform for international organization. We published in the recent, in 12 months, 3 position paper about the ethics guideline, the white paper, and the AI EU draft regulation, for example. We do also maintain a national agenda of all activities that is really interesting because there are so many initiatives popping up. So if you want to organize some event, it's always interesting to coordinate. So you know if there is some other things happening this day. We also organize many events, for example, the hackathon for the public services or the Belgian AI Week. Many of you have participated and contributed. Just to remember, there were 60 countries participating to it, and 222 speakers from Belgium. This is okay. A little overview of the activities. Next slide. Yes, I will maybe explain it afterwards. Next slide. Yeah, so we also coordinate national working group at the national level, integrating all the stakeholders from all the region. There are 13 working groups, 10 of them are launched yet, and today it's really infrastructure that will launch with the lead of Dominique and Michael, and thank to them for this. So there are vertical working group about AI4Gov, so in the public services, AI4Good, so sustainable development goals owned by the private sector or civil society, AI4Industry 4.0, that is one of the main strategic axes from Flanders and Wallonia, for example. For services is more about RegTech and LegTech, and then societal challenges. So we have AI4Health, AI4Energy, who are very active. AI4Mobility is not launched yet. In the transversal groups, we have ethics and law, future of work and skills, data governance that will be launched in the next months, and security, safety and cyber security that will be launched next month on November 24. Maybe previous slide, just to explain how we launch a working group. There is an inversion. Hello. Yeah, so the idea of this working group is really from the 2 colleagues to have with them a board representing the main stakeholder relatively to the team and the subject of the working group. Then with 2 plenary sessions, propose some objective main challenges for the Belgian community, take your feedback, and then propose a roadmap in order to achieve the goal we set up together. So the first meeting is always an overview of what is possible. The second one is putting forward the regional initiatives, and then we have 2 to 3 plenary sessions per year. And during the between 2 plenary sessions, we have the task force working on specific projects. Next slide.
I think that's it for you, Nat.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much. I wish you a pleasant launch. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nathanael, for the introduction and for taking the initiative for this AI4Belgium platform. Now, when starting a new working group, it's always important to have a state of play of the subject of the working group. And this is why Dominique, the co-lead, has prepared an overview of the state of play of AI infrastructure, and especially in Belgium. So in the coming 20 to 30 minutes, Dominique will take us through this topic, after which we'll go to the panel with some interventions. So Dominique, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Michael. Let me start with maybe some trends that we are seeing. And again, we are talking here specifically of infrastructure destined to EI and EI projects. I won't go through all of them. You can see them here summarized, and I'm sure in the chat box you will probably comment most of those, or if you have other ideas and suggestions, please do so in the chat. But one thing is for sure, starting with this one, the silicon developments have really catched up on software. We all know that EI has been, or the EI model was back in the 1950s and goes back that long. But what we've seen certainly in the past several years is that the software, the application, the libraries, the access to the data sets, all of that environment, really accelerated and changed. At this stage, there is roughly 3,500 of different tools, applications, that one can use in different vertical industries, in different environments, obviously, to really leverage the EI potential. But from an infrastructure perspective, the hardware, or the silicon in particular, was always kind of lagging. And obviously quite a lot of that has come about. The EU itself, as you're probably aware, has a significant initiative around developing silicon and chipsets, and certainly also have manufacturing inside the EU borders. So all of that environment is really changing, and changing very, very, very fast. The other piece to it that I would highlight is obviously the rise of the exascale, or pre-exascale, I would say now. The capacity that are really available these days are just staggering. Exascale, for the ones who don't know, we're talking a billion calculation per second here. So that's 10 at a factor 18 kind of calculation. So that's, to put things in perspective, that's 1,000 times more powerful than we had less than 10 years ago. And that's roughly 50 times more powerful than what we have on average available today. So the amount of computing, capacity that we have from a technology and from an availability perspective is just really changing the ballgame here, meaning we can really embrace much larger, much more complicated data sets, but much larger EI programs or projects. And obviously cloud, I think cloud these days is something that we live and breathe, certainly from a consumer and citizen perspective, but definitely in terms of EI and EI infrastructure in particular, having an hybrid strategy is probably what we have seen, scattered across education, across industry, including across research. So everybody now is really leveraging both the infrastructure on premise and the cloud in particular. A couple of things we can certainly talk later on in the panel. The way architecture has been distributed is quite an important element also of the way AI projects will be managed in the future. Now, if we come to Michael's point about what is it really we're talking about here, you can have probably a dozen definitions of AI in particular and infrastructure more in general. But AI infrastructure, we probably can define it as, basically the components that allow big amount of data, a large chunk of data to be transported from one point to another, to be able to store that data, to be able to analyze and compute that data, and obviously to make all of that in a secured way. So that's the proposed definition. Again, use the chat if you have other suggestions and you think slightly differently. But that's the definition we came up with, which I think encompasses quite a lot of different areas at the same time. Also, when we talk about the working group and the AI infrastructure in particular, there's a couple of things we need to keep in our mind. Obviously, there is an ongoing digital transformation, and if anything, just like this webcast, and anything that the COVID has brought us is we have, a significant digital transformation going on, both in the public sector and of course in industries and academia at the same time. I need to say that Belgium is at the forefront of quite a lot of things around data sets. We share a lot of data sets with whoever wants to use those data sets. There is two main data sets available at the federal level with datagov.be and StatBel, but there's around another 10 or so initiatives at the regional level to make sure that data sets are available. And obviously we wanted this work group to be in line with what's happening in the other work groups, because obviously no network, no infrastructure without security. So cyber security is quite critical. Data governance obviously has a significant impact on infrastructure. And the rest of the working group will be also tightly integrated and collaborating all together. And last but not least, definitely the EU perspective and what kind of policies and governance comes from that angle will be also incorporated. The ultimate goal of AI4Belgium, I'm sure Nathaniel will underscore that one, but in particular AI4Belgium is that we want to be certainly the top 20 country with the amount of people we have, with the skill sets we have, with the amount of research we have, the applied research, the fundamental research, with all the initiatives we have at the federal and regional level, we are belonging certainly to the top 20, top 25 countries. So we definitely want to have that country position moving forward. Now, in where do we stand? Where are we really, to put things really grounded up? There's a different source of evaluation and comparing Belgium to other countries in the world. There is different source coming from OECD, from the EU itself, and a few others. This one definitely has a clearer ranking between EI position, and we are in the top 23 according to Tortoise. But it would rank us, in the top 32 when it comes to infrastructure. Obviously, we score very well in everything which is related to basic services, including internet access, the use of websites, electricity, broadband, and so forth. But we definitely lag into having, significant specific cloud initiatives, and obviously we're not necessarily present in the top 500 supercomputing list that's available out there. Now, despite having quite a lot of data centers located in Belgium from different tiers, we have various data centers from tier 1, tier 2 level, and we also have professional industry tier 4 and tier 5, tier 3 and tier 4 data centers available in Belgium. But still, that's certainly a space where we can absolutely look at. And OECD looks at all the initiatives, the investment that's also going, and compare obviously each of the country with an average across EMEA and Europe in particular, or at least the EU in particular. So definitely space where we can improve or at least increase the visibility of the things we do. because certainly in setting up this working group here, there is quite a lot of initiatives going on, and obviously at the when we talk about the panel, and we'll have the panelists sharing quickly some of the initiative that's already happening right now in Belgium. The EU view is very similar. The definition of AI infrastructure is related to data collection, the use of sharing of data, and obviously digital and telecommunication infrastructure. So probably a little bit more broader perspective, but what's important is that when they look at AI, they have 5 pillars that they look at, and you can see them here on the slide. And infrastructure is definitely, again, one of those. So having a national and regional strategy on AI is critical, and we have that in Belgium. But having also a pillar on infrastructure is quite significant. So that's putting also the creation and the launch of this working group in perspective for you. And you could see that ties quite nicely with the rest of the working group that's available right now. Now, coming into a little bit of the meat of the subject, what do we want to do and what do we want to achieve with the working group? So you could say that the objectives are, summarized in 3 main blocks. One is around the community, making sure that everybody knows everybody, that the stakeholders, the experts, anyone which is closely related to infrastructure for AI is aware of each other and obviously can collaborate all together. So there's quite a first exercise that we are looking into that, and you'll see that in a minute. Obviously, we have quite a lot of capacity already existing in Belgium. We have several data centers, as I mentioned, that are probably top-notch and worldwide level here. So highlighting those and making sure those are visible within the boundaries and the frontiers of Belgium, but also externally and international is quite important. And obviously, being cloud, what can we learn from the cloud, and have exchange around the community around those the three items. The important piece obviously is knowledge sharing, and making sure that the information is flowing inside the working group, but also more broadly inside the larger EI community, obviously spilling over in the rest of Belgium, but making sure that infrastructure is something that is being talked about. So across all the training that's available, and there's several initiatives ongoing, let's make sure that we have a piece on infra also included. And it can take different levels, right? It can be telecom, it can be access, it can be distribution, it can be computing, it can be obviously 5G, IoT, and several dimensions to the broader AI infrastructure in particular. And obviously creating some exchange. We will have some formal sessions organized, some update sessions organized. A little bit more in particular, we could zoom in and dive into some specific projects or some specific initiatives within the working group. As I mentioned several times, there are already several very attractive initiatives being driven either by academia, by research, or even by some of the non-profit or even industry. Why don't we create something a little bit more virtual? And so in order to support SMBs, small and medium businesses or companies that want to start into AI, making sure we kind of virtualize as much as possible of that capacity that's available there. Technology exists today to virtualize data center all across, and certainly offer through a cloud interface some capacities to whoever wants to run an AI project. And obviously looking at looking at the cloud and how we use AI cloud in particular, I think there's quite a lot of learning that we can do there. Obviously pricing, obviously the type of instance that we are using, the type of stage of the AI project that we are using cloud for, as opposed to on-premise. I think all of that could be extremely powerful and relevant learning for the whole of the community. So these are the 3 main domains of the working group. Each of the working group will be, as Nathaniel mentioned, we will have working group structure, but inside a working group, we want to work with a task force. And so every working group will be structured in a similar way. So within the AI infrastructure working group, we want to work with task force. Task force that will address a couple of things, a couple of suggestions that you will undoubtedly also raise, but trying to really advance on some of the domains and making sure that the working group itself is really an active agent for EI and EI in Belgium in particular. So one thing that we definitely want to have your input on, and at this stage, you will see appearing a poll on the chat box. So I definitely want to have your input. Michael and I will definitely look into this with the BOSA team and see how we can incorporate all of your feedback around the task force and your suggestions, but also help us prioritize. So not only if you think we're missing something, just tell us, but also help us prioritize. There's lots of ideas. It would be very nice if we can really help. You can give us your help to structure that and put some priorities behind it, so we can really figure out where do we start and where do we start first. So what you see here on screen is 6 suggestions for task force. And as I mentioned, at this stage, you should see a polling mechanism popping up. And I want to ask you to rank the priority you see. So allow me to go through each of them, and then please give each of the task force a score and see where that leads us. The first suggestion for a task force is around the capacity that exists in Belgium and who are the owners of it, and put a map, if you want, of Belgium. So anyone who is interested in knowing will find very easily who to contact for which type of capacity, of which type of services, which are linked to EI and EI infrastructure in particular. So it's quite an exercise that needs to be done, very similar to what AI4Belgium has done with the startup and the scale-up. So really have a chart of, or a map, if you want, of who's who and who is owning what, or who is driving what in terms of the different capacity and availability and services that's available across Belgium. So that's task force number 1 suggestion. Task force number 2, again, cloud being part of our daily life and being part of the EI daily life, we want to make sure that we learn from the use of the cloud. And it could be public cloud, private cloud, could be hybrid cloud. So the idea behind here is, let's have a dive and interviewing some of the users of what they see as the benefits of cloud EI deployments. And obviously, you know, what can we learn from it, the good things and the bad things. And we'll put this into a form of a white paper or, you know, public document that we will share. We'll of course anonymize everything just to protect all of the sources of information, so we have really concrete and precise information. But that will give us a complete documentation and some ideas. Obviously, EI being deployed in different stage. We can, of course, look at which stage is more relevant for cloud versus on-premise. Obviously, the model creation, the inference, or the operations or production level will all have different, you know, constraints from a deployment and operational perspective. So we could also definitely look at the different stage which we are. So the modeling, the inference, or the production phases. The third task force is what I refer to the virtual infrastructure. We have quite a lot of medium business KMOs and in Belgium, which are all kind of looking at EI, not sure how to embrace and how to engage here. There's both at the federal level, but at the regional level, the regional governments have campaigns addressing SMBs, small and medium businesses, to really encourage them to embrace digital transformation and AI in particular. And obviously there are quite a supporting organization and supporting programs around those, but let's make sure we offer some infrastructure capacity so in practice they can really deploy, test obviously, but also deploy AI moving forward. So by combining several initiatives and creating a virtual kind of a layer, if you want, we believe we can be able to offer the SMB projects, if you want, the capacity that they need and the infrastructure that they need, both in terms of being very secure and also both in terms of using the data sets that's available out there. Task force number 4 is very oriented around education, right? It's making sure that in whatever education comes for EI, there's at least one chapter on infrastructure. So the goal here is very clear. Let's make sure we have one chapter on infrastructure. It could cover different things. It could cover indeed the cloud, could cover IoT and the use of distributed data, could use mobile, 5G in particular. Obviously, could be related to telecom access and broadband and all of that. Could be also linked to the way the EI data is being stored, it's being transported, and obviously how all of that can be secured. So that one chapter objective in EI training is part of one of the task force. The number 5 is an interesting one, I believe also. You know, one SMS cost around 0.14 gram of CO2. And one email costs like 4 grams of CO2 emission. So as we move into this highly digital kind of world that we live in, you know, all of that environmental footprint is becoming very critical. So is there ways we can look at infrastructure, making sure that we are environmental friendly, that we reduce obviously our footprint, and making sure that all of the environmental aspects and impacts are being taken care of. Obviously, all of the data centers, or most of the data centers, have gone through a transformation in the past few years to become more and more environmental friendly. So is there a way we can really optimize that and capture all of that information? So different ideas floating around that task force in particular. So again, give us your feedback and make sure you vote accordingly. And the last but not least, it's under the umbrella of updates. The objective is to have 2 to 3 like formal updates during the year. This could be very technology oriented. This could be more around the trends that are going and the things we see. And this could be also an update coming from all the collective members of the AI4Belgium association. So organizing all of that, making sure that those events do happen, and making sure that those updates are being relevant for the audience is part of the exercise here. So 6th proposal, again, make your vote. If you have other ideas, make sure that you comment on that. You will have the opportunity right now to do so, and we will give you opportunity at the end of this event to further and maybe comment offline if you want to do it offline at your time. And of course, this is just a selection, bringing the selection down to 6. No problem for us to add any other if there's a very good idea or strong suggestions of doing one. So there is absolutely space to do a little bit more here. And so I'll stop here for my part. So I wanted to cover very quickly some of the trends we've seen, putting basically in perspective the working group itself, and going really deep down into what we want to achieve, and making sure that the next steps are also quite clear. But more importantly, also gather your feedback and gathering your ideas and suggestions. At this stage, what I like to do is just pause a little bit on the working group and take maybe a step back and also have a bit of a perspective towards the future. So we have Eric Michiels from IBM with us, and we've asked Eric to give us some perspective on quantum computing. I think it's an exciting technology. It's certainly a transformative technology and innovation that's going and coming on us very rapidly. And I would take us really a bit of a step back and maybe think into the crystal ball for the coming years and taking some perspective from there. So Eric, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Dominique, for this introduction. In the meantime, I shared my screen and I hope you can see it.
Yeah, works.
Yeah, although I have on my screen still the polling part of the screen is still on my screen. The polling, can I stop the, yeah, okay, sorry, yeah, excuse me for the small interruption. Okay, so thank you, Dominique. Indeed, I am working at IBM as what we call quantum ambassador. And indeed, I would like to make the link with the previous, the poll, in which Dominique told you about data center, I think, and AI. I think this fits in that part. And also, Dominique mentioned footprint, carbon footprint. I think also I am going to inspire you a little bit in the next coming minutes. Dominique, do I have 20 minutes for my speech, or do I have less, or can I use 20 minutes?
I was saying 15, Eric. I'll give you 15. Take time.
Okay, yeah.
Take time.
Okay, so I would like to start with a kind of, let's say, some examples from society. And just to introduce what quantum computing is about and why it can be of importance for all of us. On the left-hand side, you see a couple of examples. The first one is in agriculture. And there, what is playing there, that is, how can we develop fertilizers? How can we make food for the growing population while using less carbon emission as possible? So doing it in a way that is friendly for nature. And the second example, you see a chemical plant. How can we develop new chemical materials at the most efficient way with the less impact on the environment? On the bottom part of the screen, you see some planes. So meaning transportation, travel. How can we optimize it? How can we develop batteries that are not heavy, that do not contain too much heavy metals and that have quite some autonomy? And of course, at the right-hand side on the bottom, you see there the representation of antibiotics, but you can also put there a picture, of course, of the coronavirus. How can we develop new medicines as fast as possible with as few resources as possible and at the lowest cost possible? Yeah? Why do I give these introductions? Because today, for all of these types of problems, we use supercomputing. We use classical computers, as I will call it from now on, to do simulations. Why simulations? Why not just do everything and try everything out? Because that costs even more time. Developing new medicines would cost 10 years if we would use classical methods, if we would use just trying it out. With with computer simulations, you can reduce time enormously. However, what we see today is that quite some calculations are just taking too much time. And they cannot be finished in a reasonable amount of time, or on the other hand, some problems cannot be solved at all with classical systems. And that is where quantum computing can play a role. Let me now talk a little bit more about quantum computing. I already have heard quite some things about it. Some people say quantum computing will replace classical computing. That is not true. It will more be a coexistence type of situation. Let me illustrate that with an example, a little bit more a technical example, but it tells you a lot. If you take here the multiplication of two integers, p and q, even large integers, and you want to get a result, and that can be a very large integer, saying, let's say 256 bytes, are very long. In a classical system, you would need about 3 milliseconds to solve that problem. If you would take a quantum computer that already exists today, and we would use it to do the same calculation, it would take us, more than 75 seconds or 30,000 times more. And it is even a prediction. Not all of the quantum computers today would be able to do that even. It's a kind of an extrapolation. So meaning that this is a typical classical problem, doing a multiplication where quantum computers will probably not the best fit. But let's turn it around. And let us take now a large integer n and factorize it in primes. You know that each, some of you might remember from their secondary school or university study that if you take an integer, you can always factorize it in primes, primes to a certain power. Here we have taken it simply, we have only the multiplication p star q. If you would do this, I would give you this challenge. A classical system is estimated to take 4.7 billion CPU years, of course, for a very large integer, an integer of 256 bytes, not an integer of 2 bytes. If you would do that with an equivalent quantum computer as on the previous slide, we would estimate it take about 8 hours. So this is acceptable, but it illustrates it's another type of problem, and we see that both types of approaches, both computing paradigms, complement each other. By the way, for people who know that, this is a typical problem that is the basis of our encryption. The public key for the encryption is N, and the private key is P or Q. The RSA algorithm is based on this fact. Does it mean that on the near term quantum computers will be able to decrypt everything? No, and that will also take probably several years. And that will become clear why. And by the way, encryption, decryption is not the only business case or use case for quantum computing. Let me explain you. First of all, let's go back to what you all know, bits. You find it in your smartphone, even for some people who are wearing a smartwatch. It is in your smartwatch. Till the largest supercomputers, as we see today at the Vlaams Supercomputer Center, for instance, they use these bits. And they do a perfect job for quite some problems, as I saw, as we explained on the previous slides. But as we go to quantum computing, we are using a different type of calculation unit. We are using what we call qubits. And a qubit is different. A qubit is having another behavior. It is not only having the possibility to represent the value 0 or 1, what we call the ground state and the excited state, but it can also represent a quantum state that is between both. It can be a linear combination of 0 and 1. And you might say this is difficult to imagine. Yes, for us it is difficult. Certainly if you come from the classical IT world, it's difficult. But in nature, it is a phenomenon that occurs often. It is the phenomenon of superposition. If you take a molecule like water with 2 atoms, then you have common electrons in the outer orbitals, excuse me. These electrons at a given moment in time are at several places. You cannot know where they are exactly. That is also a form of superposition. This is a phenomenon that qubits can have. You don't find them in classical systems. So at a given moment in time, a qubit can have the value 0, 1, or something between it. Entanglement is another phenomenon that you don't find in a classical computer. It is the fact that when the value of one qubit is known, you automatically can also know the value of another qubit, or when you change the state of one qubit, we can also change at once the state of the other qubit. Yeah? So it is also a phenomenon that doesn't exist in classical systems. It was predicted by Einstein in 1935, but it was really observed some years ago in Zurich in the CERN. So it really exists in nature. It exists on the small particle level where quantum mechanics is of application. And what you see then in quantum computers is the usage of quantum circuits. They use qubits on the left-hand side. At the end, the qubits are measured, as we always do, and the result will be put in classical bits. But between it, we will apply quantum operators or gates. And they are completely different from what we all know today, the Boolean operators that you all know, and or not, that are the basis of our classical system. So, to make a long story short, we use another type of calculation medium, a calculation unit, another type of operators and measurements to do computing using qubits. And this is so opening quite some possibilities. Let me tell you a little bit more. First of all, of course, if you have one qubit, you have two possible base states, as you see here, 0 and 1. You can have that each qubit can be a linear combination of a 0 and 1 state. By the way, this little bit strange notation is typical for qubits. It's the Dirac notation that is used for qubits. But now comes the spectacular thing. If I would use 3 qubits, then I have, of course, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 possible base states, 2 to the power 3, meaning that with 3 qubits, I can have a linear combination of 2 to the power 3, 8 state dimensions. And so you can imagine that if I go to 64 qubits, I have an enormous large number of possible base states and problems I can represent. So while my problem space is growing exponentially, my number of qubits is growing linearly. And that is the real value of quantum computing. An exponential complex problem can be tackled with a reasonable amount of qubits. Yeah? And what are then little bit, if you take them, the types of problems we can tackle, in classical systems, you would have let's say, the light blue, that's the set of problems that you can tackle with classical systems. And then you have the dark blue. These are the set of problems that we could tackle with quantum computers. And there is an overlap. Of course, there is also a theorem that states that all classical problems can be solved with quantum computers. But we don't want to do it because, as you saw in my example, it would take also too much time for the quantum computers. But we see there is an overlap of problems where we have the choice. And most importantly, we have problems where classical computers cannot help us anymore, where only quantum computers will be able to help us. And I have indeed used the term will be able. And I come back on that. What are then the big areas of, let's say, applications of quantum computers? Simulating quantum systems, and this requires some clarification. With quantum system, I don't mean here a quantum computer system, of course. No, I mean here a quantum chemical system, a system where quantum mechanics is of application. In chemistry, in material science, in high energy physics, and we want to simulate these reactions to predict what will happen and to develop new materials, to develop new compositions. The other extreme, at the other hand, we see optimization problems. Think about the traveling sales problem, which is becoming exponentially complex. Think about Monte Carlo simulations used in the financial services sector or other sectors, where we see that quantum algorithms are can be the better alternative. And in the middle, of course, our working group, artificial intelligence. Quantum machine learning, or QML, is really a booming branch of quantum computing. There are already nice books that I could recommend you. There are really a strong evolution in how to tackle machine learning problems with quantum systems. And you have different types of approaches there. I will not go deeper into detail. If you are interested, we can always organize a session about that. Then let me go a little bit, and I go a little bit taking into consideration the timing. So you see here two pictures, black, white, from the old days, color from today, almost today, a little bit more, couple of years ago. What is a similarity? We see two computer systems, and they are operated quite a lot of manual work to operate them. You also see for both not yet very much applications. You see a limited number of applications. And yeah, you don't see so much computers at this moment in time over the world. That are the similarities. What are the big differences? Yeah, on the right-hand side, the quantum computer is already accessible today for everyone via the cloud. And we offer for free quantum computing resources that can be accessed once you have an account that is for free, and you can use it. You can run quantum circuits, you can develop applications in Python and access the quantum computers. That's the first difference. A second, of course, we learn from the software engineering experience that we have acquired over the 6 decades or more, 7 decades almost. And so the meaning that we can much faster evolve in the, let's say, in the stack of solutions in quantum computers. So we know much better how to make progress in the area of quantum computing. Okay, then let's say the hardware aspect. How do we build a quantum chip or qubit? And here you see one picture. There are different approaches. Some companies, they use, and some manufacturers, they use, let's say, natural qubits, ions, photons, bosons. Some others, they have made human engineered qubits. IBM has done that using superconducting transmons. Why? Because these seem to be the most stable ones. And they allow for the best possible creation of quantum gates, operators. Will that stay as such in the future? We don't know. In either case, at this moment in time, they deliver the best results, the most high stable qubits, and we allows us to make progress in this area. By the way, IBM is also following the other evolutions, but at this moment in time, this is the most promising one, superconducting qubits based on Josephson junctions for the people who would have studied physics in the room. Okay, then let's say, what is on the roadmap? Today we are at 65 qubits, and I will tell you in a couple of seconds what that means. You have already seen my introduction. But this year, the ambition is that we have still a couple of months to go, that we will get to 127 qubits. Next year, more than double of the qubits, and by 2023, 1,121 qubits. But this is an incredible amount of, it creates an incredible amount of possibilities. And later on, we will go to millions of qubits. By the way, you might say, yeah, what does that mean? Quantum volume is another way to express this evolution. Quantum volume is really an expression of the power of the quantum computer. And there you see the ambition is to double this power, or even more than linearly, each year. You see here that we have an exponential increase in quantum volume, little bit equivalent to what the law of Moore has been done for many decades. Although the law of Moore is not the same as before anymore. The doubling of the number of transitions per service unit is not doubling each year, not doubling each 2 years, but we are going to 3 years to get the same, the same results. miniaturization, I would call it. So quantum volume is certainly also growing as aggressively as the law of Moore has always shown us. And then I come to something interesting. You see here a gentleman pushing, what is that? That is a fridge. Indeed. At this moment, when we use quantum computers using qubits, superconducting qubits, they need to operate in a stable environment. How do we create that stable environment? In very low temperatures. You need to know that this is about 15 millikelvin at this moment. You have here so a little bit more, 100 millikelvin as the absolute maximum of the area, or let's say of the atmosphere, I would call it, where qubits are operating in. Just know that the Kelvin is minus 273 degrees of Celsius. So this means that in this quantum computer, it's colder than in outer space. So that also illustrates that you will not immediately find a quantum computer in each data center. They will be offered via the cloud to start with. But of course, cloud computing, it was also told by Dominique a couple of minutes, some minutes ago, is of course key also in the evolution of AI, but also in computing in general. And now here a nice table. You see here on the left-hand side the number of qubits, on the right-hand side how many bits we need to represent the potential that is provided by these qubits. And you know that today we are further than 35 qubits, and you see we can still relatively well simulate that with a classical computer. We would need 550 gigabytes, still doable, although in-memory computing will already become impossible probably. But if we go to 280 qubits, and we would like to achieve the same capacity with a classical computer, then we would need to turn all atoms in the universe into bits to be able to get to the same potential of possibilities. So you can imagine that if we have the right algorithms for the quantum computers, what the potential we can achieve. And this is an illustration that it is about cloud computing. Yeah, just a second. Yeah. Oh,
Eric, can we just stop here, please?
I go to one slide and I'll stop. Is it okay that I do one slide to stop or 2 slides to stop? Or is that really forbidden?
One last minute, one last slide.
Okay. Some people are a little bit afraid. They say, okay, do I need to learn all these difficult things about quantum? No. There will be 3 types of developers. The people working at the supplier, the kernel developer, the people developing the algorithms who need to understand quantum circuits. You will find them in universities and special interest groups, spin-offs and so on. And then the model developers you will find in every company. So the developers will use their own normal tools to access quantum computers. Only specialized organizations will provide it. Last slide. IBM has set up a quantum network. This is not a physical network, but a community of organizations willing to work together in the area of quantum computing, to get the right training, to accelerate research, and to develop quantum applications. This slide gives you an impression of the quantum network members from different industries, from universities, and so on. Voilà, that is my slide. Perhaps some people have seen it to stop. That we have also now deployed a quantum computer in Germany, in Fraunhofer, the first one in Europe, and where we see, of course, quite some members also accessing that system. If you have questions, I know it was very rapid, but please don't hesitate to send me an email that you find here on this slide. It is an underscore between my first name and last name, and then I will certainly give you an answer if you're interested. Thank you very much, Dominique, for the time, and sorry that I took a little bit more time than you intended.
It's all right, Eric. Thanks. I think the subject is certainly interesting and certainly worth an update later in 2022 to see if we can indeed reach 430 qubits in 2022. So that would be already an achievement, and we will have to starting counting the atoms on planet Earth to get there. Shifting gears, what we would like to do now is open up the floor to some perspective based here out of Belgium. The perspective is to have here in this panel session a couple of point of view very quickly. So we have really a couple of snapshots. The idea is to have some different lighting on the infrastructure today and potentially slightly until the end of the year, obviously not a few years from now, where we can have some perspective on the infrastructure itself. So what has happened, some insights and some news. And without further ado, I'm delighted to have Professor Marquez with us, working at the IMEC. And so, Johan, why don't you give us some perspective from your side?
Thank you very much. As you know, as most of you may know, here in Belgium, IMEC is a research center where we are specialized on nanoelectronics and digital technology. So our solutions and our expertise lies into the semiconductor and system technologies, and also in digital technology platforms, networking, software skills, semiconductors, CMOS chipsets, and this expertise combined, it's applied into different application domains. Smart energy, smart industries, smart society. And within this merge of expertises, we have merged, certainly we have merged intelligence and connectivity. And from this experience, what we have seen so far, it's the following, and I want to share today. It's that we are moving, and we shall move from the traditional perspective of crunching the data in AI, so a centralized perspective, to a distributed perspective. What do I mean by a distributed perspective? We have a distributed AI, and we need to interconnect the dots. We need the infrastructure to interconnect the dots from data acquisition to data processing. There's a whole chain of different components that lie in the network. By network, I also take into account the computing capabilities, edge computing, cloud computing. So nowadays, a network is from the place where you get the first input data, you turn it into bits, and you send them up to where it needs to be processed. So there's a whole chain, and it's distributed. And this brings a lot of challenges from the infrastructure perspective. And these challenges are going to need to be addressed in this working group. And we need to start thinking from, okay, by distributing the intelligence, what do? Do we carry data towards the intelligence? So we need strong networks and strong connectivity, interconnected connectivity, to carry a massive amount of data towards where the intelligence lies? Or shall we distribute the intelligence towards the data lies? It's a different perspective from a centralized perspective, from a traditional centralized perspective to a futuristic distributed perspective. That's from the AI perspective. And now what lies behind that in a secondary, in a supportive secondary layer, infrastructure. So we need to understand that infrastructure, it goes from the first bit where we capture the first bit of information, IoT sensors, IoT world, up to cloud computing, and all what we need to interconnect there, going from the RAM, from the wireless part, the transport part, the core, the computing in the middle, edge, and computing and centralized computing in the cloud. we need to take different approaches. We need to federate the infrastructure. We need to agree on how we are going to interconnect these components. We need interfaces. We need a bunch of different things that we should be discussing within this working group in the upcoming months. But my main message is we move from a crunching data perspective, centralized in high capacity, high performance computing, to distributed infrastructure. That'll be it. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. And I think this topic, the fact that we're looking at distributed infrastructure as opposed to centralized infrastructure is certainly, as you mentioned, a topic for the working group, but also probably also for a more public update that I was referring to. The next update comes, so we're moving from Antwerp to Hasselt. We have Geert-Jan Bekst from the Vlaamse Supercomputing to give us also some update on the VSC. I need to say that the VSC has published, for the ones who haven't seen it, a great jaarverslag annual report. So if you want to know, how to run a data center, a supercomputer, and all the services that goes with it, I think that's certainly a good reading. So Geert-Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I will be presenting the Flemish Supercomputing to you, the Computer Center to you. So that's a consortium of the Flemish universities and their associations. We put quite some emphasis on services besides infrastructure, but I'll be brief about that because that's not the subject of today. So one important service is consultancy. How can you benefit from supercomputing? So we help the client, which is either academic or industry, to determine whether there are options, whether there are possibilities where supercomputing can have added value. Another place where we can actively help is by facilitating research collaboration, doing matchmaking for R&D projects, because of course we know our academic users, and we can put links between projects from industry and our researchers. Very important, and it has already been mentioned today, of course, is training. And our trainings range from introductory to pretty advanced. For instance, a couple of years ago, we organized a winter school on artificial intelligence. And then, of course, the infrastructure part, which is the subject of today, we have quite good infrastructure. It's state of the art, and it's divided into tiers. So we have a tier 2 layer. That is the infrastructure which is hosted by the universities. And for instance, to give you an idea, there is quite a lot of GPU hardware available. And what is typically interesting is that we have compute nodes with several GPUs in them, either 4 or 8, and they're connected with, to be technical, NVLink. So that allows for quite some powerful computations to be done. Above that, there is a regional level, which is the tier 1 level. And we will have, it's not in production yet, but we will have also quite a lot of GPU capacity there. So that's the compute part, but it has already been mentioned. There is, of course, also 2 other components which are pretty important. On the one hand, there's cloud, and we do have cloud infrastructure as well. That's our tier 1 cloud project. And of course, having computation and having cloud, but no data is not so very interesting. So there's also tier 1 data on which we provide a data platform. And these 3 components together, of course, can be orchestrated to work together and to ensure that you have a platform on which to run your R&D projects and your pre-production projects. That's about what I wanted to mention with respect to the VSC, but we also collaborate internationally, both in the PRAISE project, so for European supercomputing, the EuroCC project, which allows for services, especially to industry, and of course, in the LUMI project, where Belgium is a partner, and LUMI will offer an enormous amount of GPU capacity. It will be a really very nice platform for AI. And Belgium has invested in this, and there will be an allocation model which especially takes into account access for industry. Thank you.
Thanks, yes, Jan. I mean, indeed, the Lumi is quite a flagship collaboration project. The capacity there is staggering. I think there is like 200,000 cores being used and deployed in Finland. So it's a great capacity available there. So zooming through the digital highway from Asselt to the south, we go to the Senairo, and we have Benoît Dampierre. So hello, Benoît.
Hello.
Let's talk about Senairo and what you do. And I know you have you are in the middle of a similarly to also a massive upgrade of your infrastructure. So what is Senairo and what's your upgrade going to?
Exactly. So Senairo is a research center in Wallonia. We have some quite similarity with the VSC in some aspects. So I will present you. Don't be afraid if you have the same words somewhere. So we are a research center in numerical simulation, optimization, data analysis, and data exploitation since about 20 years. And we have about 80 people working on it. We are based in Charleroi, and among our activities, we have a tier one operator. So we give access and we give expertise about HPC. Our current infrastructure, you have the link in here to have more details, is in service since about 10 years with 2 major updates. We are about 330 teraflops currently, which is not so much for now. We share the capacity between academics, so 2/3 for academics, 20% about for our internal usage, so research and industrial contracts linked to Senairo, and 10% of the computing capacity is dedicated to direct industry contracts, so industry can have access to the infrastructure. The next generation is currently in building, in construction, I would say. It will be in production. It should be in production around the spring next year, and is about 10 times more powerful than the current one. And among this infrastructure, we will have 2 dedicated artificial intelligence nodes with about 180 teraflops, which is more or less half of the current computing capacity, which is so quite a lot. And the message I want to give you is, as well as the current infrastructure, the future one will be accessible to external users, such as industry and academics. So it's not only for Senairo, for our research, it's clearly dedicated to be accessible for, I will not say everyone, but a lot of stakeholders. So yes, we are more or less with the same aspect than the VSC in this side. For me, it's done.
Yeah, thanks, Benoît, and good luck with the go live. And we will surely update this community when you guys are fully operational, and do, of course, a proper service to the launch and the go live of your new nodes here. Yeah. Shifting gears a little bit, we spoke quite a few times about regional initiatives, regional infrastructure initiatives and programs that are in place. And I'm delighted to have Philippe Compère from the Agence du Numérique with us to give us a quick snapshot of what's going on in the region. So, Philippe?
Yes, thank you, Dominique. I hope you can hear me well. I wanted to go back to one of your word in the introduction. You said that bandwidth is not a problem. As you may know, in Wallonia, I would be very happy to, if I could say that, but we still have some problems. And that's what we are really working on today, within the Digital Wallonia strategy, regional strategy, especially within the Giga Region project, which I'm in charge of. Also very related to the Digital Wallonia for AI project for AI improvement in Wallonia. We are working very closely with Nathanael and all the team on that, and it's very important to increase the connections and the network in Wallonia. That's why I highlighted here some of the projects we are working on today, especially, of course, you heard about 5G in Wallonia and the situation. So according to the group of experts report of February, a new group of experts now is in place to deal with the norms for the development of 5G in Wallonia. The government already decided that 5G will be developed in Wallonia, but first of all for the proof of concepts, and that will be since next year in the frame, of course, of the RRF, the resilience and plan de relance européen, also with the labs and the demonstrators. And we are working on this for the moment. This is also linked, of course, with all the infrastructure project on fiber optical development with the partners like, of course, Proximus, and you heard about the new joint venture with Eurofiber, Unifiber. We work a lot, of course, with other partners like Sofico on this, and all the data centers in the different zones, business centers and industrial centers we have in Wallonia. We had a good example with Benoit earlier. IoT network, I just wanted to highlight that thanks to the top agreement in Wallonia since 1917 already, all the three operators has developed a full coverage on IoT network with NB-IoT and LoRa. And this network still has to be used, and we have a lot of projects on that going on. All this is also now, we are working on setting up a governance and a steering program called Gigabit Wallonia, with the aim of putting Wallonia on the good road to the objective, European objective of 2030, of course, gigabit and 5G for everyone, and especially aiming at doing as much as we can before the end of the current government in 24. And this, I will not say a lot about this yet, because this still has to be decided by the government, and is in direct relation also with the plan de relance, especially the regional plan, who is not yet totally decided, as you know. But it's on a good way. And all this, of course, is in direct relation with all the different projects, not only speaking about AI with, as I said, with Digital Wallonia for AI, but also with cybersecurity, with all the different aspects that we are tackling in Digital Wallonia and the agency. Any question, of course, I'd be ready to answer. Thank you.
Super, thanks, Philippe. We'll open the floor here. I'll pass on now to my partner in crime and co-lead of the work group, Michael. Why don't you take it from here?
I'm going to be very brief. I don't even have a slide, so that makes it all short. From my perspective as the manager of the Beacon, which is a community of companies and organizations active in digital technology, I'm always looking at the competitiveness of our industry and of our companies. And of course, in digital technology, everything is very volatile. Competition from abroad is very fierce, and I'm looking for ways to strengthen the possibilities, the chances for our companies to grow. And infrastructure is definitely one thing that can create opportunities for our companies. So that's going to be my main angle in this discussion, so not the technical angle. And the parallel could be drawn to what is happening I know for a fact in Flanders, but I'm sure it's the same in Wallonia as well. In terms of 5G, you see a lot of temporary licenses, testing licenses, consortium forming in ports, in cities, and so on, where companies can test this new technology, can anticipate, new relations are forged, and this creates opportunities for the companies. So yeah, that's why I think that the work that we're doing, that this working group is doing on infrastructure, could have the same effect as the 5G test beds. And to the panelists, we already have received a couple of questions, and one of the questions from Sophie was for Benoit. Sophie is asking if the government is already using your infrastructure, and if no, why not?
The government, as a government, I don't know. If the government wants to have access to our infrastructure, I think the process should be to go through the traditional process. So we have to make an offer for them. I don't know if they want to have access, but what is, in a way, they have access because they fund a lot of the part of the infrastructure. So through academia, they have access. Maybe they have access through academic partners, but I don't know. We have also something which is complex because there is some confidentiality in the contract. So even if an industrial have a contract with us, we don't know what they do on the supercomputer. So maybe government have an access, but not directly through us.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps I could relay the same question to Geert-Jan.
So yes, there are a couple of government agencies that have access to our infrastructure and that are actively using it. So indeed, government is present on our systems.
All right. I'm just looking at the chat. So at the audience, if you have questions, just drop them in the chat and I will relay them to the panelists. Serge is asking how AI4Belgium and this working group will manage potential conflicts of interests with tech partners involved in other sensible sectors such as military. Dominique, if do you have an answer to that question?
Oh, that one is a tricky bit one. So I would refer that one to Nathanael, if you allow me to just pass on the hot potato. But we will be, I can speak about some governance that Nathanael and the working group leads have been discussing, which is we want to make sure that we do the right thing, obviously, for all parties concerned. And so anything which is too much commercially oriented is also not welcome, in the sense that this is really to advance, Belgium and the regions and all the stakeholders, including academia, research, applied research, industry, and non-profits here. Obviously, there will be some touchy environment. I would probably also refer to data governance, because it's a topic for data governance. How do we govern access to data, which data are being made available, and obviously how we secure the data. So there will be certainly among ourselves working leads, discussions about this topic about military, but certainly in a broader sense, cybersecurity. You probably heard it from Nathanael, but the cybersecurity working group will be launched later on this year. We will go through the same process, obviously, of setting up the working groups and the task force. So military and sensible applications will be certainly a topic that we will bring up. So Serge, I'll make sure that we relay that question probably.
Professor Marquez, you raised your hand.
Thank you. Regarding the previous question from Sophie, well, basically the answer was administrative procedures. If there are negotiation and administrative procedures, the government will access such infrastructure. I just wanted to add the technical perspective to this. I really would like to see in the future that an outcome of the working group that we are building today, it's that we federate our infrastructures, that we have a common way to share access first of all, to share access to the different users, that they have a unified way to access this this platform. It's a plethora of different computing platforms, and each system has its own way to access, its own way to use them. And it will be very interesting that we have a collaborative approach. We have a common approach in order to ease the access. I'm just talking from the technical perspective. I know there are so many administrative and administrative matters behind, but from the technical perspective, we should aim to have a federated way to integrate the systems and to allow the access in an homogeneous way to such heterogeneous systems. I think this is something that one of the task force should be also looking into it. I like to call it federation. This is coming from the testbeds. We have different high performance testbeds for wireless networks, going from IoT, 5G, smart connectivities, smart sensors at certain locations. So all this wide variety of platforms in Europe, we have already federated with European projects and different funding, and we call them federation. That's why I use the word federation. I think we should federate our facilities in order to have a common Belgian giant federation of facilities. Thanks.
That's a great message, Johan. That's a great message, and I think that also answers Walter's question, who is asking why among stakeholders we are not more transparent. Walter, I think this is exactly what we try to achieve with this working group. I think your point is valid, and if you remember in the first poll that we did, I think the first potential objective was mapping the capabilities in Belgium and making this mapping accessible to all kind of stakeholders, and this way to increase transparency. And then we can eventually move to the federated system that Johan talked about. So it's definitely the objective of this working group. If anybody has a question, I think this is the right time. I hope I'm not skipping any questions. Perhaps just because the discussion, and I must say, obviously, between this eminent panel, I am the layman and the ignorant fool, you could say. But the discussions have been quite abstract and quite technical. But could any of the panelists give illustrations of use cases of companies with certain solutions or challenges that have been using your facility and that have been helped with the services and the infrastructure that you provided? Any tangible use cases?
I can perhaps present one, which is it's a small company, and it is actually it's a spin-off startup, and meanwhile not so much startup anymore. It's basically working on cooling solutions, for instance, for electronics and so on. And they use VSC infrastructure. They make a lot of use of the tier 1 and also tier 2, also visualization aspects and so on. And the interesting thing is that they do design by AI. So basically they run lots of models based on an AI approach, and the AI solution actually comes up with designs that humans really couldn't come up with, because they're so out of the box that you really don't get that kind of solution. It reminds you perhaps a little bit about DeepMind Go thing. So it's quite similar. And this is a very nice example of using AI and on AI infrastructure, which is basically offered by the VSC.
Very good example. I'll make sure, I wrote down that I'll make sure that we'll circulate this as an example and take the part of the working group, also make sure that we circulate such examples to make it tangible. So thanks to both of you. I think it was a great insight and great addition to what we could do here.
We actually have a movie about it, a use case movie. So the company name is Diabetics. If you go to the VSC YouTube channel, you will no doubtly, without any doubt, find it. I think there are even 2 movies about them.
Great. All right, so let me bring this to a close. Thanks to all participants. This is not over. We will keep working on this one, as you mentioned. I think Professor Marquez touched upon it. We need this federation approach, and that's really indeed a core idea behind setting up the work group in the first place. So we will go back and be true to our roots here. The post-event evaluation is available, so if you want to give us some commentary there, please do so. We are looking at the next steps already. The next steps will be another session. We will probably go very deep there in some of the regional initiatives that are going on, and we will certainly also go back and make all these findings public. We will definitely set up the task force. I think there were several good suggestions that were exchanged today. Obviously, we will look at the feedback and the voting mechanism, but I wrote down a couple of things on and ideas about future task force here. So those are the clear next steps for us. Quick advertisement moment. There's quite a lot of things happening in terms of agenda with events. I'll make sure also that the board and the core members receive all of those key dates, and obviously amplify them when they are made available. The big events that we have lined up is coming up next year in March. On the back of what we did this year with the Belgium AI Week, we will now do a European AI Week. So several countries have joined up the idea, and we will be running in parallel across different countries a very specific AI week on the 2nd week of March. So that mark your diaries. It's coming up and it's confirmed. And last but definitely not least, join the coalition if you're not already there. Follow us on the social media. You can also go to the website of AI4Belgium to register yourself, and obviously you will get access to newsletter and all sorts of information. And in closing, I want to thank obviously Alexander and Casper from the BOSA, who really helped us setting this session up and then worked with us in preparing and making sure this event happened as smoothly as possible. And I definitely want to thank all the speakers and the panelists for their contribution, their preparation work, and obviously for all the audience and all the questions and your interactions here. So I thank you a lot from the heart. It will be followed. Michael and I are the co-leads of these working groups, and we are committed to make this stepping ahead, and you will see more from us moving forward. I wish you all a great rest of the week, and this event is now concluded, and safe